So it started back in Newsong, I guess, competing with Russ Lee every night, which is
Yeah.
not an easy game right there. And then,
Yeah.
of course, Billy Goodwin would step up and make us all look like shit. But, you know, it's still, it's one of those things like, I, I, it energizes me to the point to where, uh, I just sing better when I am on edge just a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, get lazy doing worship leading, honestly, as a
Mm-hmm.
vocalist.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm sorry, we got this may not be what you want to talk about, so I just
No,
I got off.
I think we're already in the podcast. So I love how we started. I love where we're going. So, man, I just got to tell you, just for the sake of an intro here, um, I just love you, Charles. I think you're one of a kind. You have been, whether you know it or not. I think we've talked about a couple of these things. We'll bring it up here, and as we go through the conversation. But you've had a little bit of a strand through my life where we've crossed paths and we've had a lot of similar stories. And I think that a lot of what you and I have done is very similar. But I've always looked at you as a great example of longevity and legacy and being able to recreate yourself decade after decade. And so I'm excited to have this conversation with you, Charles. Welcome to the One Degree of Andy podcast. Let's get going.
Hey man, thanks for having me. And listen, I feel the same. You're one of my favorite vocalists and people on the planet, and it goes way back to those years, man. 30 years, where it seemed like about every 2 weeks I'd run into for him at the Atlanta airport.
True. Yep.
Heading somewhere. But I've appreciated you and just admired you for years and years, Andy. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, thanks, buddy. Well, you've got quite the legacy as a as a solo artist, and you already mentioned being, out with Newsong, and that's where I first met you. Was
Yeah.
and I had this memory of you with a whistle, and there was a there you were just
Like,
dude, you were doing the things that I wished I could do. You're so much more of an extrovert on stage than I ever was.
yeah, but you didn't have to be. You just stand up and sound like butter. But it, those new song days, they of course they were a quartet, and then they shifted to this super group thing, and I just happened to be opening for them one night in Wagerville, Tennessee, at the Pogo Fest. It's a big deal. It's Pogo cartoon of some sort, and so I'm in the middle of the field on a tractor trailer, flatbed, and I'm opening for Newsong, and I was excited about that because they had already had this massive legacy of songs with Trophies of Grace and Forever King and Arise My Love and all this, and so I was excited to meet those guys. But it just so happened that was the first night that they had tried a concert without their lead singer, Eddie Middleton, who had just left the group, and so they were looking to add a singer, and so that night was the night that struck up that conversation after I opened for him, and then they got to a conversation with Russ Lee, and then they decided, hey, let's get them both, and let's create a band and create this, super group thing, which turned out to be just a blast. So that went from 4 members to 6 official members, but then a couple other guys that we would put on the stage with us, and it became this, show with some brass and drum breakdowns and me blowing the whistle because I didn't play, you know, stuff like that. And it was quite a spectacle in concert. We had a really fun run.
Yeah, you definitely guys were definitely contemporaries of ours, and being on the same label, and um, I always loved what Eddie Carswell was able to do with just taking everything to the next level. He was a real showman himself, even though he wasn't the front face of the group. He knew how to make things work, and we always admired that because we kind of started out the same way. Going, we'll get to your story here in a minute, but I love parking on Newsong for a moment because they had come out just a few years before we did, and
Mm-hmm.
they were really the Imperials weren't the same as they were back in the '80s, and there really
Right.
was no. I mean, it was just us and Newsong who were the kind of this new pop gospel quartet, and we would run across them again at festivals or, water parks or, you know, and Eddie was just somebody we always looked up to, and Eddie Middleton, of course, and those guys are always somebody that we took a lot of, we took a lot of direction from, and were, always loved to ask them questions. And then, but to see what they did with you and with Russ, and how they, they brought a band on stage, and it turned themselves into a must-see event. That had to be pretty cool for you, going from, having to carry everything on your own
Hmm.
to, was that something that was refreshing for you, or kind of like maybe took the weight off just a little bit?
Well, yeah, because I had been, well, when I graduated from college, May 23rd of 1992, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I just started singing in churches. I had a couple
Yeah.
songs and a little radio station in Birmingham, WDJC. There was a DJ there named Ronnie Bruce who was gracious enough to play this little song I had called "The Sparrow," and it got enough attention from locals that churches started calling me and asking me to sing. And one thing leads to another, and I started doing camps and stuff. Well, about a year and a half into that is when I opened for Newsong. Up to that point, I was just trying to figure this thing out with my little cassette tracks, and then we went to mini discs. You remember mini
Oh
discs?
yeah, yeah. Those were awful. In
That was,
hindsight, those were a really bad idea.
wow, that was really stupid. But and so I'm in the middle of all that, just trying to figure this thing out. But I had built enough in my own solo thing over that year and a half that I didn't really just want to leave it all. So when I even when I joined Newsong, I made an agreement with Eddie that I would still be able to do some solo dates on the side, because I never wanted to really leave the local church, honestly. And so he agreed to let me do that as long as it didn't interfere with their calendar. But boy, when I would get on that bus with Newsong, it was so fun because I didn't have to worry about who booked the concert. I didn't have to worry about, you know, any of the logistics. My role in Newsong was just to get on that stage and sing. And so for the next 3 years, I felt like I got my master's in education on the road, just watching, learning, mostly what to do, but also somewhat not to do.
Yeah, yeah,
And which is part of your education as well. And honestly, I got to really watch firsthand and be a part of things like the Dove Awards, and doing concerts and festivals with guys like you. And in fact, there was one particular instance. It was a sound check with you guys. I'll never forget sitting over on the side, uh, and I was a huge fan of your album, The Ride. And I'll never forget standing over on the side of the stage, because we were on together at Atlanta Fest with you guys, and hearing you guys sound check, and Mike Childers laying down the groove on The
mhm.
Ride.
Oh yeah,
Uh, and I just stood on the side of the stage, like I was like, now that right there, now that's a groove right there, man. I'd really this song, and I love that record. And then Don Cook, of course, produced it. Who's a mutual friend of ours who just passed away, and I always dreamed that he would produce a record for me, and one thing led to another, and he ended up doing 4 records for me. And
mm,
but all that goes back to those New Song days. Had I not had those 3 years with New Song, I would have never met the people I still contact and talk to today, like you, and I would have never learned what I'd learned to on the road, that I still use today. Those were good years, man.
yeah. Is there ever a desire to maybe go out and do a few shows with them, if they were to call and say, "Hey"?
Yeah, in fact, it's really crazy, man. One of my former students at Liberty, his name is Jay Coleman. He's basically has my role in New Song now.
Oh wow,
They've do a lot of singers. It's a big group, and people like Michael O'Brien and all kinds of people have sung with New Song now. And so I actually had them come to Thomas Road Church for the 40th anniversary concert, and we did a concert together. And the one thing that kept going through my brain, Andy, every song was, "Gosh, this stuff is high. Why does it have to be high every song?" Like, why don't we just lower it a step? I mean, why we're killing ourselves here. And then, Goodwin, who's, gosh, I think he's got to be almost 70, maybe over 70, just over there wearing it out, man. It's amazing. The guy is a freak of nature. And Russ Lee too. So, some serious talent in that group and a really huge heritage of songs. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to do some dates with them in the future. We talked about it a little bit, but they never called back. So maybe, but I do talk to Eddie Carswell every once in a while. We'll call and he'll need the number to somebody or me too. And, so I stay in contact with those guys a lot.
Yeah, they were. They really were. Now you can't tell the story of Christian music without Newsong. I mean, they. I never thought they got the credit they deserved on the award side of things, or I don't know. They weren't the darlings of Christian music, but they left their legacy in ways that I think dwarfed anything that they could have won early in their careers with Winter Jam and just so many of the things that they created to
Yeah.
to bring
Extreme.
Christian music to huge groups of people. Yeah.
Yeah. People don't realize that Newsong owns the Jam tours. They don't realize that Newsong owns the Extreme conferences. People don't realize how influential Newsong has been behind the scenes in some of the biggest tours in the history of all Christian music. So it's kind of cool. Of course, all that started right after I left the group. So people everywhere I go, Andy, they're like, "Hey, did you record Christmas Shoes?" And I'm like, "Nope, that was literally 6 months after I left the."
Incredible. Well, let's
And
go back. I want to go back to your. I want to go to your journey just for a minute. And I mean, New Song's just a small part of what you've been, of
yeah,
what you've been a part of. And I want to go back. Let's go back to the early years of Charles Billingsley. How you knew that you had a voice that could, possibly carry a concert or be something that people would want to hear, because we all kind of go through that, right? I think, I know from my story, people would tell me all the time when I was a teenager, "Oh, you're really good at this. You should do this for a living." Or, hey, I'd have a deacon come up and say, "Hey, get this kid's autograph now because he's going to be famous one day." And you're like, "What do I do with that? I don't know where to start. I don't know how to fulfill these expectations." But there is something in you that goes, "Yeah, I think I am good at this." What can we go back to those moments in your life of when you felt that, and what were those first steps you took to pursuing being a vocalist as a career?
well, there's several, as it is with everybody's career, there's a few little marking points where you just go back and you remember that moment. Um, I think the first moment for me would be a youth conference in seventh grade when I was in Richmond, Washington. My dad was a minister up in the Northwest, and we lived in Portland, Oregon, and which used to be a beautiful city, by the way.
Hmm.
Uh, and we were in Richmond, Washington, doing and I was just part of a conference, and I was in seventh grade, and it's the first time I ever saw a Christian band. It was called the Continentals. Do you remember them?
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Brass section and all this stuff. And I had started playing trumpet in sixth grade. And so it blew my stinking mind. I was like, what is this? I mean, I'd never even seen a church with a balcony in my whole life. I'd spent my life in tiny little churches, never seen more than about 300 people in a church service. And so I'm at this conference and I'm witnessing this band, and I'm there with about 700 youth. And I'm like, okay, this is cool as grits. And then we would go to this other conference center called Glorietta, and there was
Hmm.
this man that would come and sing. Two men actually. Russell Newport was one of them, and the other guy was Richard Bradford. And they would come, and they were what you called music evangelists, but they had these huge booming voices. I mean, these guys were world class singers, and I'd sit there literally as a kid on the front row. All these pastors and their wives, and there's this one kid, and he's on the front row, and it was me because I was mesmerized at their singing. And so I would go back, to the that we traveled in a travel trailer. I'd go back to travel trailer, and I'd sing, and work on these things. And so I think at a pretty early age, I knew I could sing, but I didn't want to do it in front of anybody. And one day, it was my junior year in high school. We had gone to a church down in Jacksonville, Florida, a huge church, and up to that point, I'd never seen a church with a balcony, and so this was a awesome experience for me. And we had about 600 students in our youth group, and um, we were in the church service, and it was the first church that ever had a church orchestra. A guy named Camp Kirkland had started.
Oh, wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
he was on our staff there, and it was the first place to ever have a church orchestra. So I was playing in the youth orchestra trumpet. But one Sunday morning, I'm just standing there, and I am literally just goofing off, acting like an idiot, because I do have that potential. And I was just goofing off, singing like kind of operatically during a worship service, because you could sing real loud in that building because the orchestra and everything, it was really loud. And so I'm just playing around with my friends. And the guy in front of me turns around and goes, "Hey, you got a really good voice. You need to sing for our Sunday school class." And I was like, no, you know.
Hey, I want to stop you right there because I think this is very interesting, and it's one thing that I preach to my vocal clients is that there's a goofiness I think you have to unlock with your ability to sing. Like instead of just trying to fit between the lines and go straight down the middle with this beautiful voice that what am I trying to say here? That doesn't go any crazy places. I'm just like, man, just open up and try some things. Like
Yeah.
try to be wild, try to be weird, try to do things with your voice that you wouldn't normally do, and
Mhm.
just see where that takes you. And it opens up these places in your voice that can unlock your imagination. Excuse me. So I think that's really interesting because I would do that a lot too. I would sing in these. I don't know if you remember our friend Tim Burke, but
Oh, yeah.
Tim, I would during sound check, he would come in during sound check, and I would sing one of our songs, "When It Comes to Living." And when I saw him walk in, I would go into my operatic voice and sing that "When it comes to living, we've only got one life," and he would double over laughing, and it brought me such joy. And he would walk up and say, he'd say, $1,000 cash tonight if you sing it like that in the concert. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's not a good trade-off there. But again, one of the things I love to tell my vocal clients is let's try something really different. Let's try singing in an opera voice, excuse me, or singing in a way that just takes your voice to this different place. And that's something I think I connected with you as well. You know, we talked about earlier, my memory of you is you stomping around on a stage blowing a whistle. That's another form of that, of just kind of letting the weird out. And
Yeah.
that's where you find the good stuff. Anyway, I love that part of your story.
Well, it's true. And I would stand in the shower and sing opera, and believe it or not, I was a huge fan of Luciano Pavarotti. And in fact, when I was in high school, this is before I ever sang in front of anybody. When I was in high school, I bought a ticket and went by myself to his concert in Jacksonville, Florida,
Well,
um, because I was such a fan. So I would try to emulate him, honestly, um, who I still to this day feel like he's the greatest singer that ever lived. But I was just being stupid. The guy asked me to sing a song. Well, the next week he finds me. He was a senior, but he was kind of the director of all the music that happened in our high school youth group. And he finds me, hands me a track of a Steve Green song called "Wounded Soldier."
mm,
Goes, "Hey, you're on next week." Well, he hands this track to me in front of all my football playing buddies, because I played football and I was the starting running back for my high school, and that's what my life was about. And he hands me this track, and I was like, so then all my friends are like, "Well, you got to do it. You're on," this kind of thing. So as a dare, I did it. I did the whole thing as a joke. I learned this song, and I get up, and it was the craziest thing. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. And I just literally felt the Holy Spirit fall in that song on me. And it was something I'd never experienced before. And Camp Kirkland was in the back of the room, and he heard me, and he asked me to sing a song for the youth choir tour, and so I did, and that's what started this whole thing. And I ended up going to Samford University on a little vocal scholarship, and ended up in a group called Samford Singers. And for 4 years I sang with a couple of girls that everybody listening to would know, Karen Fairchild, and her name was Kim Bramlett, and they of course are the two girls in Little Big Town
Yeah,
now. Of course, you know them because Karen left Samford and went to Truth,
that's right.
and you guys all knew each other. You know, we were all this one little pool of people. Um, but it was so funny too because in the Sanford days, Karen and Kim were pretty stiff on that stage, and I was always the Lucy one. Now they've come out of their shell quite a bit, but it's really amazing how the process goes. And when I was in college, I was just trying to figure this out. And what I felt called to from seventh grade in that youth conference up to where I was in college was I knew I was called to ministry. And I was called to ministry in that seventh grade conference when I heard those Continentals. That's the day I surrendered my life to ministry. But I always felt like I was going to be a preacher, Andy, instead of a singer. And I'll never forget, it was my junior year in college, and I'm really not sure what to do and how to make a living doing either thing. And I felt called to preach. And I was in the middle of a conference in Winnipeg, Canada, coldest place on the planet.
Yep, been there.
Yeah, I mean, it was brutal. And it was January too. Like, who
Ooh,
does a January in Winnipeg? But anyway, that's what I was doing. And there's about 35 pastors there, small little crowd. And I'm going through this tension of, am I called to preach? Am I called to sing? What am I called to do? And I'll never forget it. I was singing another Steve Green song, People Need the Lord. Do you remember that
people
one?
need the Lord. Oh yeah.
That's it. And I'll never forget it. It impacted my life forever. The Lord clearly spoke to me and said, you're called to preach, but your messages are going to be about 4 minutes long set to music.
Mm.
And I know that sounds really trite and weird, but that from that day forth defined a lot of things for me. It defined what kind of singer I'm going to be. It defined how I'm going to communicate a song. It defined the kind of songs I'm going to write. It defined the kind of songs I'm going to choose to sing. And it really defined everything for me on how to deliver a song on a platform. I feel like every song I sing is a sermon that I'm preaching to this audience before me.
Mm.
Because my real call is to preach. And so that's been the mantra for everything that I record and do and write from that day as a junior in college.
I think that's really important because, you know, again, it's something every artist struggles with is what's my voice? What am I going to say? What's my career going to be? And if you can have a really clear word from God on this is who you are and this is what I called you to do, man, it gives you such an advantage when you do sign your contract, when you do get a chance to go out on the road. And I say this all the time to young artists. If you don't know who you are before you sign your record deal, they're going to tell you who they want you to be. And you're going to say yes to things that you don't need to say yes to, or you're going to make compromises that you're going to wish you hadn't if you didn't have better direction. And I think that's just, man, what a gift God gave you early on to say, this is what I'm calling you to do, and this is the path I want you to travel. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it really helped me when making a record. It helped me determine what I was going to put on there and what I was not.
Hmm.
Um, it it may have hurt me some, honestly, because I probably chose some songs over some others that were a little more conducive to radio play or whatever, simply because of the simplicity of it. I'm kind of drawn to a lyric that's a little deeper, probably a little wordy at times, which speaks to me, but at the same time is probably not as easy to learn or catch,
Yeah.
than um, but then after that, I'm going through this, and I changed my major in college to religion and philosophy, but I have remained as an opera minor. So I've
Oh,
always
wow.
had me that kind of enjoys really just singing.
Yeah.
And I mean, over the course of a career, my first after the Newsong days, I signed a couple of record deals, and I sold so many records that both those record companies went out of business. And I was, and for the course of the years, I was just making records, making records, making records. But then, everything kind of shifted from singing songs to people to now we're singing songs with people. And I shifted from this artist who sings to a worship leader who also is an artist. The same kind of shift you've made. Um, and I don't know if it's really because we intentionally did it to just maintain a career as much as it is. That's just where music has gone in the church. And I've lived my life in the church. And so, um, gone are the days really where we're bringing artists in to just sing songs to us. It's
Yeah.
really more about, hey, let's all joining in the presence of the Lord. And you know what? It was wonderful from a perspective of, I love drawing the people of God into the presence of God. There's nothing more powerful than that to me. But at the same time, the artistry of just singing was a little lost to me.
Yeah.
I just want to rear back and sing, you know? And so I sort of reinvented myself again, and jumped into this jazz and slash classical world, and did a record that I'd always wanted to make, and did that about 3 years ago now. And it's been so stinking fun because it scratched that little itch that I had to
Yeah.
just rear back and sing.
I think that's amazing, and I love the direction you've gone lately. And again, I think you touched on something here about artists learning how to become worship leaders. But I think worship leaders need to know how to become artists as well. I mean, and there's a duality I think that both can live together. And it sounds like you and I both had that call of leading the church,
Mm-hmm.
spoken on us, or we felt that early on. And even though we didn't end up leading churches in our in our early days, we did scratch that artist itch, in the best way that we could. We magnified our voices. We got around other great musicians and songwriters and producers and learned the art of making great music that moved people. And then when worship comes in, you have to learn how to switch. But I think for guys like you and I, it was probably, I'm going to speak for me, and if it's off for you, let me know. But I always felt like that was my initial calling, was to lead people before the throne in worship. And I wonder if that's not the ultimate calling for everyone that God gives a gift of music to, that worship should be the first thing. And that after that, we can use our gifts the way we want to. If we want to build furniture, we can make, I think about the Bezalel, who was one of the first people that we hear about in the Old Testament where God poured his spirit into. He was an iron worker and a gold worker, and God gave him the Holy Spirit to make these beautiful artifacts for the temple of meeting, where God's presence was going to show up with the Israelites. But yet Bezalel, I'm sure, had a business that was doing that on his own and making money, and doing other things instead of just working for the temple. So I think that those things can coexist. And again, I think you have to live long enough and you survive long enough this industry, you see things come back around again and again, right? And I long for a day where the artistry in Christian music comes back, to where we do have producers like Don Cook and Michael Omardian and Brown Bannister, and artists that want to say something deep and do it with some musical flair, instead of just trying to do the same thing over and over again sound wise, so that it can be sung in churches. I mean, am I off on that in your perspective?
No, not at all. In fact, I do feel like there's a little bit of a shift happening, going back towards some artistry, especially with some artists. The problem is, worship became a billion-dollar industry,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a conflict there in a lot of different ways for me. I always feel awkward when we're going to have a night of worship and charge tickets for it. That always feels weird to me. But that's what is going on all over the country. And I mean, I've participated in the same kind of thing, because it's one of those deals where, um, even though it is a worship night, there's still the artistic elements that are there. It's so funny because I deal with all of our students at Liberty all the time, and there's this tension that just exists, between, am I a worship person? Am I an artist? And my answer to them is yes. Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Um, at all times, you're both. And sometimes there's a moment in a song where you become a worship leader, and there's a moment in a song where you become the artist. The key is using wisdom to choose your places and pick your spots where you are effectively doing both. But the issue at hand is what the motive is. What's the motive? As an artist, are you trying to draw attention to yourself, or are you still pointing people to where we're heading in the context of a worship environment? As a worship leader, you can end up doing the same thing. A lot of times we lead worship at the same time we're patting ourselves on the back. We got one hand in the, hey, we sound really good today, that kind of thing. And so there's this tension that's always there. It never leaves. It's always there every time you step on a platform. And managing that tension and pointing your congregation, to the throne 100% of the time is a very difficult thing to do, when you're on the platform, because you're going through that tension yourself of, okay, where do I pick my spot? And for a player, it's a little easier, I think, because when an electric guitar player throws in a lick in the middle of a turnaround, nobody really thinks anything of it. But if a singer gets a little too boisterous at the wrong time, everybody thinks they're showing off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I don't have an instrument to play, so the only way I can express myself is by singing some sort of whatever. But I've learned that if I don't pick my spots effectively, then what I'm doing is I'm becoming a distraction to the people of God in their worship experience. And so I have to be careful when I move into the artist moment, that it's timed right, and it's, not, a distraction to people engaging. Uh,
Can I run a wild theory that I have
yeah,
by you? I believe, and through my study of scripture, and especially over the last 3 or 4 years, after I've kind of gotten out of the full-time worship pastor job, I'm still a worship pastor. I still lead worship a lot, still mentor and coach a lot of worship pastors and worship leaders. One of the things that I've seen through scripture is that I feel like those of us that have been touched by God as artists and given this incredible gift to be able to move hearts and move minds with our voices, with our instruments, with our writing, with our producing, and I believe that we have the spirit of Lucifer. Now, Lucifer, not Satan.
mm,
Lucifer was, before, what we know of Lucifer in Scripture was he embodied all of those artistic, those artistic gifts, and he was the leader of worship in heaven. He was the high priest of Eden. He was the one that was, providing the musical and artistic expression of heaven. And we have that. And what was Lucifer's fall? Was he wanted the glory for himself. He wanted
mm,
to be honored above God. And isn't that, you just said that. It's about I want to express myself through this big vocal lick, or I want to, I want to wow the crowd with my ability to make music. And we do feel that hand patting us on the back. Again, I tell worship leaders, you don't think people are applauding for you, but they are. You say, "Oh, no, no,
yeah,
they're applauding for Jesus. They're applauding for Jesus." And when we have that mindset, it's right. We want to deflect that as much as we can. But come on, I mean, there is that sense of pride that always wells up in us. It goes, "Yeah, we're pretty awesome," and that is the beginning of the downfall, and it's something we have to fight over and over and over again. Does that make sense to you?
oh yeah. I mean, I guess the question is, would they applaud for Jesus if you sang all the wrong notes?
See, and see that's the double side of the coin, right?
That like the other day we had Bethel here, and the line for this thing was around the building twice, and our building is huge. It seats 5,000 people. And I mean, the next morning I was teaching a class at Liberty, and I was like, "So what'd you guys think about the night with Bethel?" And they're like, "Oh my gosh, it was so powerful." I said, "Yeah, it was." And they're like, "You know what I loved about it?" One of the girls said, she said, "It wasn't a performance, it was just worship." I was like, "It wasn't a performance at all?" She goes, "No." I said, "Oh, really? So were you here at 6 a.m. when they were setting in the lights?" "Oh, well, no." I said, "Did you smoke on the stage?" "Well, yeah." I said, "Do you think that that they were trying to sing the wrong notes, or do you think they were trying to sing the right notes?" "Oh, well, no, they were singing the right." I said, "Yeah." "Do you think the guitar players actually rehearsed those songs?" "Yeah, yeah." "Okay, so it was a performance. Let's not deny the fact that it is a performance. The issue is, where's your motive?" And
Right.
loose motive changed at some point in light of eternity way past. Um, and his pride got the best of him. And I love that analogy, Andy. I've never thought about that, how Lucifer became Satan, but it was all because he was competing for the glory of God, and God does not compete for his glory.
Amen, brother. He will share his glory with no man, and that's something I think we all have to carry as artists. We have to carry that warning of just be careful. Be careful, because this is a drug. Your face on the big screen, your voice amplified through the room. You can feel that you said this. I'm getting chills as I think about it. You talk about that time when you knew you felt the presence of God, the anointing of God flow through you, and you're like, oh, I'm built to do this. You can get that same emotional feeling by people being moved by what you do. You can feel it, you can see it, and I don't mean to get off on this and take the podcast this direction. I think it's important to talk about that. This is what every artist deals with, and the ones who don't deal with it, the ones who maybe chase it a little too far, are the ones that a lot of times come to ruin, and they have so many problems in their lives, as opposed to, you know, and again, I'm not saying so many things can, so many things can come at us and take us down, but I do think that's something that we all have in common. You and I have it in common. That we do. But you're aware of it, so you can deal with it, and it just makes you. I think it gives you longevity in your career if you can do that.
It does, and to be quite frank with you, that's the reason I left Newsong. Not because Newsong's motives were wrong, not because of anything else, but I felt this tension in my spirit, because I'm the young guy on the stage, and there's a certain amount of when large crowds and young women see young men on the stage, and they exemplify the kind of man they would like to marry or be with. There's a certain amount of uh, sexual image that you portray on a platform. And, to be quite honest, even in Christian music, let's be honest, it's still part of what sells.
That's right.
You won't find a whole lot of ugly artists out there, right?
That's right. No, not in this day
So,
and age, at least.
yeah, there's a few, but, but, the point is that one night we were doing a concert, and we were doing an altar call. Russ is up there doing the altar call, and I'm down front with another buddy of mine, Scotty Wilbanks, who was in the group. And about 30 young ladies, because I was 24, and Scotty's like 24, and Scotty's single, and about 30 young ladies come down the altar, and Scotty and I are there to greet people at the altar. And I was like, well, "Are y'all coming to meet the Lord?" And they're like, "No, no, we just want to get a hug and a picture." And I was like, "Man, I don't know how to deal with this." Like, I just, I felt such tension right there in that moment that I thought, man, maybe I'm not cut out for this deal. And because I felt like I was in this weird situation where I'm trying to do ministry, but yet I'm distracted by 30 teenage girls in front of me now. And this is not good for me. This is not good for me. So I had a hard time dealing with that. And so it was part of why I ended up, leaving the group shortly after and just going back to the church. Not that there's not girls in the church too, but I just felt like, if I'm
Yeah.
doing, church singing, that it's a little less of that kind of atmosphere. Some artists handle that stuff perfectly fine. No big deal. You can have millions of fans and, they're clamoring all over you and it's no big deal. Well, to me, I really had to wrestle with that as a young man to make sure that I was keeping my heart pure. I'd been married for about 6 months. I'm trying to just keep these walls and boundaries up. And honestly, I think leaving Newsong may have been what helped save my career, only because, and it was nothing Newsong was doing. It was all a personal thing with me.
Yeah.
But it helped me go back to my original calling. And now I do women's conferences all over the country, and it doesn't even faze me. I'm not even remotely interested in any of that temptation, and thankfully. But at the same time, I had to wrestle with that early on, and it's all goes back to that competing for who gets the glory here. And I found it easier singing in churches to just I found it easier to make sure I was giving the glory to the right, to it, to the Lord, instead of myself in a lot of those situations. But you know then when I did this jazz thing, it's weird because I wanted to do that from a purely vocal perspective, but also because I honestly felt called to, you know, get outside the church and figure out a way to deliver the hope and the truth and the love and the grace and the forgiveness of God by way of songs that everybody knows and loves, because God's the author of all that's good stuff too. And so now when we do these symphony concerts, which I hope we'll do more, I've only done about 4 of them so far. I'm able to actually literally share the gospel without ever opening the Bible, by
Hmm.
way of talking about things that are, kindness and love and goodness and grace and forgiveness. And I use all these secular songs to communicate the gospel message without them actually hearing, the overt gospel message of Scripture. And it's been really fun because the whole crowd is mostly people that don't know the Lord, and yet we close every concert with "It is well with my soul,"
Mm.
and every single time, that's the biggest response of the whole night.
I don't know. I don't know that I know anybody else in Christian music like you, because you're so multifaceted. I mean, we could talk for another couple hours about even your business ventures and the things that every time I'm around you, it's like there's something new you've got going on. And one of the hardest working guys in Christian music and in worship. But one thing I want to get to is where you are now in your full-time job, which is at Liberty University at Thomas Road Baptist Church. And I got to share this story, okay? It is my podcast, so I have to tell this story. And you and I have talked about this, so you know this story. But God had called me, and you talked about that time where you're like, God, what is this? Like, what am I really supposed to be doing? And that happened to me in around 1999, 1998, 99, where I'm just like, kind of like, I don't know, something woke up in me where again, it wasn't For Him's fault, it wasn't the label's fault, it wasn't anybody else that we were working with. But I was just kind of like, God, what is this? Like, what did you really call me to do? Is it for Him? Because I don't think it is. And I really wrestled with that for over a year. My wife and I would pray for hours at a time, just like, God, what is this that I'm supposed to do next with my life? And ultimately, it was about coming back to leading worship and to be in a place where I was serving the church more than I was serving my needs as an artist. And I got a call to help a friend of mine start a church in Orlando in
Mhm.
around 2000, and it was hard, bro. Oh, it was so hard. I still to this day in my prayer time I say, and God, just one more thing, please don't ask me to start a church again, because that was the hardest time of my life. So I'm doing For Him, and I'm also getting back on Sunday mornings to lead worship. And this went on for several years, where it was just like our church wasn't growing. I felt I felt abandoned by God several times. I felt I felt like, man, I can go out with For Him and you know, 3,000 people will buy a ticket, and yet
Right.
I can't get 100 people to come to my church for free on Sunday morning. I didn't have it all figured out. I had all this wrong thinking, right? And so I, so this is, I look back now and I was mad at God for doing this, but I see his wisdom in it now. He was teaching me something. You and I got on the same plane. You mentioned seeing each other in the Atlanta airport a lot. And you and I just happened to get on the same plane. I don't know if it was going to Orlando or going somewhere, and we sat across the aisle from each other. And you looked at me and said, "Hey, man, I'm so glad we've got a few minutes together. I'd love to ask you some questions. How's the church thing going?" And I said, I lied through my teeth and went, "Oh, it's going great. I love it. That's wonderful. What do you want to know?" And you said, you know where I'm going. You're laughing. Uh, you said, "Oh man, that's great to hear because I just got an opportunity too to kind of get off the road and be a worship pastor at a church." And I'm like, "Really? Where are you going to go?" And you said, "Thomas Road Baptist Church in Lynchburg, Virginia." And my heart just sank because I was like, "Gee, thanks God. You sent
Mm.
me to Orlando to start a church where nobody's showing up, and you send my buddy over here to Lynchburg, Virginia, one of the largest Baptist churches in the world, on Liberty University campus." And okay, God, thanks a lot. And you know what? That was something I wrestled with for years. I got to be honest with you. I wrestled with it for years, just on going, God, I don't understand. That doesn't seem fair to me. But
Mm.
then there was a time once I got to Tulsa in Church on the Move, and God just began to really bless me with some things I've been praying about for a very long time. And I was able to I was able to put my heart at rest. And I share that story about you, Charles, everywhere I go. And
Really? That,
everywhere I go, because it's to me, it's a, it's a tale of God saying, "So who are you? I thought you, I thought you said you do whatever I called you to do, not what I called
right.
Charles to do, not what I called Mark Harris to do, not what I called Michael O'Brien to do, not what I called, whoever else. I called
Mm.
you to do this. Are you going to trust me or not?" And to be able to look back, you know, 20 years ago on that conversation and that journey, I just want to say, man, I appreciate you for asking me that question in that moment, because you started me on a journey that would teach me a lot of things in my life. And so that's an intersection I have with you that just continues to follow me the rest of my career.
Isn't that crazy? But you know what? You know what's funny? I've had conversations with other people. Well, even Mark, when he was here doing a thing at Liberty and he was telling me about how he was heading to Gateway. And, here I am in this wonderful place at Tom's Road Liberty, and he says Gateway. And I'm like, God, I never get to go to the cool churches, man, like that. you know and then you're at Church on the Move, and I'm thinking, man, Andy's at a really cool church. I want to be at a cool church. And I go through this all the time. And I think it's because as artists we're naturally inclined to comparison traps. And
Yep.
I really think that that's a huge trap of being discontent. And I've never been content as an artist. Sometimes discontent is a good thing because you want to keep getting better,
Right.
but there's a side of being discontent that can be very harmful. And in my life, it's always been in the world of comparison. I hear you sing "Where There Is Faith," and I go, God, I wish I had a voice like that. And then I watch, Mark go down to Gateway, and I'm like, man, I wish I had a culture like that. We got our buddy named Michael Neal, who's he just kind of sits in a room and brings table. Like, wow, I wish I could just be as creative and cool as Michael. He gets to go to all the cool churches. And I'm like, you know, and then I look back at my career and I go, you know what? God had a specific calling for my life, and I am quite happy with. It's taken me a long time to get there, but I'm quite happy now when I look back and realize, you know what? Uh, if I would set my personal ambitions aside and learn how to be content in where I'm at, uh, it's amazing how God will just continue to use me. And I've had to learn that a really hard way because, man, you always want to be at the next place. And, that's part of the reason I went to California, came back, went to California, came back now, several times. And I've finally gotten to the point now after 32 years of doing this. In fact, this Thursday, let's see, we're recording. I don't know when you'll actually air this, but we're recording this in mid-May. On this Thursday, May 24th. It will be the 30. It'll mark the 33rd year of my ministry,
Wow.
and I look back and I go, okay, God, there's a lot of guys that started when I did that don't even do this anymore. And I'm so grateful that even in the midst of all my mistakes and all my comparison issues and everything else, I look back and I go, wow, you carried me a long ways, and I'm just grateful. So, you get to the other part of your career where we're at in our age, Annie, and you kind of look back now and you just kind of go, wow, I really got to do this. What do I wish I was filling up arenas with tickets sold? Yeah, yeah, I really do. But at the same time, um, to be able to still stand on a platform at 54 years old after 33 years and just sing a song is still quite a privilege for me.
And look where you are and the influence that you have. You probably influence and have impact on more future worship pastors and worship leaders than most people on earth. I mean, the amount of people everywhere I go to a lot of Baptist churches and sing on weekends and lead worship, and I can't tell you how many interns, how many young worship leaders, how many worship pastors are like, oh yeah, I'm from Liberty. Yeah, I graduated from Liberty, or I spent some time at Liberty University. How many artists are on the road right now that got their start at Liberty University? And you had a big hand in that. You had, you know, I believe here's what I believe about, and again I talk about this to so many artists, is that if we'll just keep
Yeah.
going, because God's not done with you. God
Mm.
never wads us up and throws us away and goes, well, I can't really use him anymore. I'm out of ideas for him, for her. That's not the way God works. And even if it doesn't look like in our perspective that God's doing more and more and more with us, we have no idea the impact on eternity that we're having if we'll just stay faithful. We'll just keep working it out. We'll just keep wrestling, with the pride versus, serving and all those things that come with being an artist. There's no, we just have no idea where God can take us. And if you were to maybe, think 30 years ago that you'd be in the seat that you are now, you'd be like, God, there's no way. There's no way it would. And even now, the impact that I just want to encourage you and bless you by saying that the impact you're having on believers around the world is incredible, just because of the platform you have to speak into young worship pastors and worship leaders, that not only in the past but in the present, the more that you do. And I do believe that you know the last third of your career will be greater than anything else you've ever done.
Oh man, Andy, thank you. I received that, my brother. And you're right. I mean, 30, I guess it was about 22 years ago when I was in that initial conversation with Dr. Falwell about starting a school here to just raise up the next generation of worship leaders. I never dreamed that it would become, by far the largest school of worship in the country. And we've got 1,200 worship majors now at Liberty, every one of which are going to leave here. Not every one of them, but many of them are going to go out of here and go on to platforms and influence people for the gospel for the next 30, 40, 50 years in their lives. We hear about all this NIL money, trying to raise money for football players who may or may not go play professional football. And I'm just like screaming for scholarships for these kids, because they're going to influence the world for 50 years from their platform. And to have an opportunity to speak in their lives at this age, and it's really important. In fact, one thing I tell them all, Andy, is sociologists will tell us that because of social media and everything, every one of us will have a direct influence in the lives of at least 10,000 people over our lifetime,
Wow.
even the most introverted of us. And so every time I stand in front of a classroom, every time I'm in front of a concert audience or whatever it might be, I don't just see these 50 people or these 100 people. I see these 100 people times 10,000. Because if I have something I can say or sing that impacts them directly, then I know that they may repeat that or in some way, shape, or form live that with the potential of influencing 10,000 more people in their life. And so the opportunity for multiplication is massive when you use your platform wisely and effectively. And so the fact that I still have a platform to do that from is a massive blessing to my life. So I'm just grateful.